Hey guys, RG Penguin here, and today I'm going to be discussing 8 common low elo mistakes stopping you from climbing. The biggest things stopping low elo players from climbing are common mistakes that are easy to learn from and fix, and yet most players struggle to do so. With that in mind, I'm going to show you guys how to avoid these mistakes so you can get more kills and climb out of your low hell. Comment below and leave a like if any of these tips are useful. Let's get right into the video. Have you ever noticed that in warm-ups your aim feels cracked, and you're hitting way more shots than you would in a real game? The reason for this is the first common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing. Think about this, when you aim at somebody, do you think about aiming at their head, or do you simply just flick to them and shoot hoping for the best? If you answered option 2, don't worry, most people make the same mistake. When you're warming up, there's less information to take in and you simply just have to click on a bot's head. But when you're playing an actual game, you constantly think about your surroundings and what the enemy is doing. Because of this, you stop focusing on aiming at enemies and simply flick at them, hoping for the best. To fix this, try to actually focus on aiming at an enemy's head rather than just flicking to them subconsciously. This may take you a while to get used to, and you'll likely have to take your time aiming, but trust me, once you get used to it, your aim will become way more consistent. The second common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing is your communication. Communication is one of the most common low elo mistakes. It's so important that I'm going to break it down into subsections. Firstly, don't backseat game. All this does is just make it so that your teammates can't hear footsteps, makes it harder for them to concentrate, and it's just plain annoying. I know everyone's had to experience with someone backseat gaming in one way or another, and I'm sure a lot of people have been the backseat gamer. And I promise you, it's just not helpful. Now, callouts are a great thing, don't get me wrong, but try to keep them limited to enemy locations, how much damage you did to them, and the utility usage, such as smokes and walls. Secondly, you need to be communicating the previously mentioned callouts regardless of whether your teammate's talking or not. I know it's really hard to keep going when no one's responding to the comms you make, particularly if you start struggling in a game. But I promise you, regardless of whether anyone else is making comms, the comms you are making a difference. And you can get around your teammates not talking. Whenever you're dead, you can spectate your teammates and then make comms for them. That way the rest of your team's still getting the information. Finally, low elo players rarely have plans for a round. They all magically group up at one side and push. Honestly, it amazes me how often you see low elo players not communicate but all manage to push the same side together. It's one of the grey mysteries of Valorant. However, you really should be communicating simple strategies. I know people in low elo rarely work together, so keep the strategies simple. For example, get a teammate to drone or dog for info, someone to smoke, set points, and someone to flash. Finally, I know this last part might be pushing it, but you really don't have to push a side together. I know the voices in your head might be telling you that you have to all group up together and push, but more often than not, it's better to split up and push the same side from 2 directions if possible. Now, this is especially true on Fracture. That map is literally called Fracture. It's split into 2. And people still refuse to push from both sides and make it harder for the defenders by forcing them to have to use utility on both sides of the site and focus people on both sides. Okay, so the third common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing is that you don't know map callouts. Now, callouts are extremely important. Being able to call out the exact location of an enemy is much better than saying he's here. However, they can be hard to remember, particularly if you're not used to other similar competitive FPS shooters such as Rainbow Six Siege or CSGO. The easiest way to find most callouts is to look above your minimap in game. This will tell you the callout of where you're currently standing. However, if you want to see the callouts for elsewhere on the map, you can open up the map using your keybind found by pressing escape, then clicking controls, interface, and then under general, find open map or toggle depending on what you prefer. And then by pressing and holding this button depending on your chosen bind, you'll open a larger version of the minimap that shows you all the callouts. Now, this won't have some ones that players have come up with their own, so you'll have to learn those over time, but it will give you the vast majority of callouts on all maps. Okay, so the fourth common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing is that you don't learn from your mistakes. Now, I'm not saying you need to record and rewatch your games to learn from your mistakes. That's way too time consuming for a casual player, trust me. However, during the beginning of rounds, you should be thinking about what you could have done differently in the previous round to have changed the outcome and have learned from that. This could be as simple as not peeking a risky angle or changing positions of your defensive setup or checking a corner, getting some info with your Sky utility or maybe a Sova dart. However, the one thing you should never do is blame your teammates, no matter how much you think it was their fault or how big of a whiff they had. At the end of the day, there's always something you could have done better or something that you can learn from that round to improve upon the game. And at the end of the day, blaming your teammates isn't going to get anyone anywhere, and it's just going to make everyone tilted. And this leads us into the 5th common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing. And it's something that everyone does regardless of elo. As much as learning from your mistakes is a good thing, focusing on the past too much can kill you. Trust me, we've all been tilted when we've gone on a massive losing streak and you check your career profile and it's just red all the way through. I know this may seem strange, but taking a step back and realizing it's just a game will not only stop you from getting tilted, but also help you play better. However, if you're unable to do so or still get tilted anyway, just simply take a break. It's just a game at the end of the day. You can just try getting some food, watching your favorite YouTuber or streamer, going for a bit of a walk. It really doesn't matter what you do, you just need to take your mind off Valorant for a bit so you can reset. I know this may seem weird at first, but I promise you, once you implement this tip, you'll stop losing games back to back because you're tilted. The 6th common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing, particularly for new players, is not understanding how recoil works. There's lots of advice out there on how to spray at a wall and then pull down left or right to make the spray pattern tighter, so I won't discuss that. However, I have noticed that low elo players commonly don't let their recoil reset when they tap or spray, particularly those that are new to FPS shooters. For those of you that don't know, if you tap a gun repeatedly, the bullets will not be accurate unless you wait for the recoil to reset. This works the same if you spray, pause, and then spray again. If you have this issue, there are 2 things you can do. You can either shoot at a wall or bots to get used to the rhythm of the gun, and that way you'll know when the recoil is reset so that you can shoot again. Or you can add a slight crosshair spread to help visualize when your recoil has reset. Now this works for both shooting or moving, so if you have issues with moving and not stopping before shooting, you can fix that as well. I recommend only adding a little bit though. If you add too much, it can be distracting. Okay, this brings us into the 7th common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing, and that's that you use your utility too quickly or you're using it for the sake of using it. Now honestly, this is one of the biggest differences between low elo players and high elo players, and that's how they use their utility, and it's one of the main reasons you'll notice a lot of players come from games like CSGO where there is some utility but not to the level that Valorant has it, and they struggle to be able to rank out, whereas they might have done a better job in CSGO. There's so many similar examples of this mistake, so I'm just going to list off 2 of them. So first of all, players will throw utility out before an enemy can even physically be hit by it. So at the start of the round, everyone's standing behind the barriers, they can't physically walk forward for a period of time, and then once they can, it takes them a while to actually get to a site. And a lot of the times players will throw out like a sage slow or something before an enemy is even close enough to be affected by it. The second example of this is people using sage slows or race grenades, etc. before an enemy is actually pushing. So I understand wanting to prevent a push, but using your utility before an enemy is pushing means that they can just wait it out or push without having to worry about your utility. Now, there's so many variables that dictate when you should or shouldn't use your utility to the point that this mistake is made in every elo. So the best advice that I can realistically give you is that you think about whether your utility had any impact on the round and be honest with yourselves here. So if you throw out a slow and the enemy all waits behind it and maybe it gives your teammates to get into a great position to defend the push, then sure, that's useful. But if you throw out a slow before the enemy's committed and it's not making any difference on whether your teammate gets into a great spot or not, that's not doing anything. Whereas you could have waited until they're actually about to run out, and then maybe what ends up happening is 1 or 2 people get out, but everyone else is stuck in a slow, so then your team's able to take an easier fight. That would make a big difference. The 8th and final common low elo mistake stopping you from climbing is you over-rotate too much. Now, this really is a common mistake. I see people rotating as soon as they hear someone shooting or as soon as they see someone on the radar. Most common of all, that someone will call out 1B and suddenly your whole team's defending B. Now, don't get me wrong, rotating is very important, and the earlier you do it, the easier it is to defend a site. But you need to wait until you actually see signs that are committed to the site. To help avoid over-rotating, you should tell your teammates when to rotate and when not to rotate. Now, I wouldn't get so far to the point where you're backseat gaming and kind of just bossing everyone around, but a good example of this is if you hear one person outside of B and you see people rotating and you don't think they're committing, then you could tell them not to rotate yet. And then on the flip side, if you hear 3 people or 4 people or so on outside of a site, then you could ask for rotates in that situation. Now, on the flip side of this, if you notice when you push a site, it feels like the whole enemy team's there, you can try faking a push by having one person go to a site on their own and then everyone else go to the other side. And then having your smoke players, if they have the ability to at least, throw smokes across the map. So somebody like Astra or Brimstone or maybe even a Viper could set up util at the start of the round and then rotate. And that way, when you have your one person on his own at the site, he can, shoot around, make some noise, throw out a bit of util, and then you can throw a smoke or 2 across the map, and that will get people thinking, oh, they're pushing, they're committing util. And then everyone that's waiting across the map, once they hear them rotate, can then walk in. Now, the key to this is that you do not make any noise. If you make noise, there's always going to be one person that'll stay behind, or maybe they won't rotate at all. So you just got to be really careful with that. Anyway, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any other mistakes that you could share to help others improve upon, or maybe you'd like to see me show in future videos, let me know down below.